Somewhere in the bowels of a fortress-monastery on Terra, behind vault doors sealed with purity wax and psychic wards that hum at frequencies designed to make the human ear bleed, classified dossiers exist on every Traitor Legion. The Emperor's Children file is thick with documented atrocities, catalogued mutations, and intercepted transmissions dripping with Slaaneshi ecstasy. Blood that reportedly refuses to dry stains the World Eater's dossier, and the Death Guard file. Archivists have never been able to fumigate the smell. Then there's the Alpha Legion. Their file is thin, disturbingly thin. No patron god documented. No demonic pacts on record. No intercepted prayers to the Ruinous Powers. It reads less like a traitor's rap sheet and more like an intelligence blackout. The Alpha Legion possesses the lowest chaos taint of any Traitor Legion in the Warhammer 40,000 setting, marked by a near-total absence of patron god dependency and negligible worship of the Ruinous Powers. 10,000 years have passed since the Horus Heresy. Every other Traitor Legion has fractured under internal feuds, mutated beyond recognition, or consumed itself from the inside. Yet the Alpha Legion endures as a functioning military force. Their grand plan, the strategic objective apparently driving 100 centuries of covert operations across the galaxy, is something absolutely no one knows. What if they were never chaos at all? The Imperium's classification system recognizes exactly two categories for a Space Marine Legion: loyal or traitor, servant of the Emperor, or slave to the dark gods of the warp. No third category has ever been created. No appeal has ever been heard. The Administratum applied the label to Legion 20 at the close of the Horus Heresy, sealed the file, and hasn't reopened it since. The possibility that a Legion stamped traitor might have been running deep cover for 10 millennia threatens that system at its foundations, and the Imperium has powerful institutional reasons to let the question rot rather than crack it open. Evidence doesn't care about institutional convenience. 8 other legions share the Alpha Legion's classification. Every single one fulfilled the label's expectations. The Emperor's Children surrendered to Slaaneshi and shattered into dozens of hedonistic warbands pursuing sensation across the galaxy with no central command. Khorne's influence devolved the World Eaters into scattered berserker bands whose organizational coherence barely exceeds a riot. Each dark apostle of the Word-Bearers built his own cult empire within the Eye of Terror, splintering the Legion into competing zealot fiefdoms. Across all 8, a mechanism holds. Corruption deepens. Competition for divine favor intensifies. The Legion fragments, and operational capability degrades until the original fighting force exists only as a name attached to warring splinters. The Alpha Legion defies every element of that pattern. They claim no patron god and display no biological reshaping by any ruinous power. Their organizational structure operates through decentralized cells, functioning with the discipline of a professional intelligence service rather than chaotic warband dynamics. Most critically, they didn't retreat into the Eye of Terror after the heresy, that colossal warp rift where the other Traitor Legions fled to shelter under distorted time and their patron deity's protection. The Alpha Legion remained in real space. They endured real time. They absorbed 10 unbroken millennia of inquisitorial purges and imperial counterintelligence without a demon Primarch's shield or a dark god's favor. The origin of their supposed treachery doesn't begin with a dark god's whisper or a demon's bargain. It begins on the surface of a world called Nurth, during the Great Crusade, before the heresy has erupted, but after its seeds have already taken root in the War Master's psyche. Dan Abnett's novel Legion drops the reader onto Nurth alongside Imperial Army soldiers and Alpha Legion operatives working a routine compliance campaign. The kind of grinding planetary pacification the Great Crusade churned through by the thousand. In the margins of that campaign, far from Imperial oversight, something extraordinary happened. The twin Primarchs Alpharius and Omegon were approached by an ancient alien intelligence network called the Cabal, a coalition of xeno species whose collective history spans millions of years. Their representatives were alien in the most literal sense, beings whose biology, psychology, and temporal perception bore no resemblance to anything human. Communication ran through a perpetual named John Grammaticus, a human operative embedded in the coalition as translator and go-between. Already, this meeting contains behavioral evidence worth examining. The Alpha Legion sat with alien prophets. They evaluated non-human strategic analysis and incorporated the Cabal's data into their operational calculus. Chaos narrows minds, amplifies species hatred, collapses strategic sophistication into the obsessive pursuit of a patron god's fixations. Sitting across a table from Xenos intelligences and treating their analysis as actionable describes intelligence professionals assessing assets. It bears no resemblance to the psychological profile of Marines falling under the warp's influence. The Cabal's analytical method, called acuity, allows modeling of branching galactic futures with disturbing precision. They'd seen the Horus Heresy coming and knew it would happen. Their analysis produced two possible outcomes, hinging on a single variable: who wins. In the first future, the Emperor defeats Horus. Chaos is contained but never destroyed, and the slowly decaying Imperium's 10,000 years of institutional rot and collective psychic suffering nourishes the dark gods until the galaxy is eventually consumed. In the second future, Horus wins. Humanity falls. The species is exterminated, but humanity's collective psychic death scream starves the chaos gods of their primary sustenance, and the ruinous powers wither into extinction. One path preserves the species while dooming reality. The other sacrifices the species to save everything else. Alpharius and Omegon weighed both paths. What they delivered was one of the most striking declarations in the entire Horus Heresy canon. The twins screamed, "The Alpha Legion has always been for the Emperor," and then chose to follow Horus. They embraced apparent treachery as the vehicle for the most extreme act of loyalty conceivable, siding with the traitor specifically to engineer Chaos's ultimate annihilation, accepting damnation as operational cover. Every subsequent Alpha Legion act shifts from betrayal to deep cover execution the moment you accept that declaration at face value. A detail from the novel lingers over the entire case. Abnett includes a scene in which the Emperor and Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's closest advisor, perhaps the second most powerful human psyker who has ever lived, are playing Regicide, the 40K analog of chess, with two Hydra pieces on the board. Every other Legion had one Primarch. The Alpha Legion had two. Someone at the absolute apex of Imperial power knew about the anomaly. If the Emperor, the being who designed the Primarchs themselves, knew about the twins and permitted their secret, then the Alpha Legion's capacity for misdirection was baked into their creation as a deliberate design feature. The Hydra didn't grow a second head by accident. The Cabal's prophecy deserves a caveat. Its alien analysis, not divine revelation, and subsequent novels have raised legitimate questions about whether the two futures model was accurate, or whether the Xenos coalition manipulated the twins for its own survival agenda. That matters for evaluating the Cabal's trustworthiness. It doesn't undermine the defense's core argument, because the argument rests on intent. Alpharius and Omegon believed the analysis, weighted against alternatives, and made a choice they understood as sacrificial. A soldier who throws himself on what he believes is a live grenade reveals the same character whether the grenade detonates or not. Their conduct during the heresy itself bears the fingerprints of sabotage rather than genuine commitment to the traitor cause. Horus dispatched the Alpha Legion to bring the White Scars into the traitor fold, a critical diplomatic objective, given that Jagatai Khan's Legion was one of the most mobile and lethal fighting forces in the galaxy. The Alpha Legion, whose Great Crusade reputation rested on meticulous planning and flawless operational execution, botched the mission spectacularly. They provoked the White Scars into open combat, pushing Khan firmly and irrevocably into the Loyalist camp. For any other Legion, this reads as incompetence. For the Alpha Legion, a force whose pre-heresy operational record was among the most precise in the Imperium, Failure at this scale strains credulity. Read as deliberate sabotage by a deep cover cell executing its actual directive of weakening Horus from within. The White Scars debacle stops looking like a blunder and starts looking like tradecraft. 7 years. That's how long the Horus Heresy lasted. The label Traitor Legion has been applied to the Alpha Legion for 10,000. If the prosecution builds its case on those 7 years, the defense builds on every single day since. Because the millennia after the heresy is where the Alpha Legion's record diverges most sharply from every other legion sharing their classification. The divergence demands understanding what chaos actually does to a Space Marine legion when given deep time. The warp reshapes everything it touches: flesh, will, memory, purpose. Space Marines sheltering in the Eye of Terror experience time in distorted fragments, centuries compressing into moments while individual heartbeats stretch across decades. More destructively, the Imperium compounds mutations with each generation of exposure, burrows demonic entities into armor and neural architecture, and demands worship through a patron god's progressive reshaping of body and mind. Over 10,000 years, this process has ground most Traitor Legions into configurations their Heresy-era founders would barely recognize. The Death Guard provides the sharpest contrast. During the Heresy, the Legion's first captain Callus Typhon, later known as Typhus, Herald of Nurgle, deliberately sabotaged his own Legion's warp navigation, stranding his brothers in the Imperium. The Destroyer Plague, a supernatural contagion of staggering virulence, swept through the trapped fleet. The toughest, most resilient Space Marines in existence, gene-forged to endure environments that would kill ordinary Astartes, these warriors screamed inside their own sealed power armor as flesh rotted, regenerated, and rotted again in an endless cycle. Mortarion, their Primarch, held out longest. He refused submission even as his sons perished around him. Typhon had engineered the entire crisis to shatter precisely that resolve. Eventually Mortarion broke and surrendered to Nurgle, accepting demonhood as the price of ending his legion's torment. That original fracture line between Primarch and First Captain never mended. 10,000 years later, it still bleeds. Mortarion, now a demon Primarch, simmers with resentment toward the god who enslaved him and the subordinate who engineered that enslavement. Typhus operates as a rival power center, commanding his own fleet and campaigns while barely acknowledging the Primarch he sold into bondage. Nurgle sustains their rivalry because suffering is the plague god's currency, and a permanently wounded command structure generates suffering in perpetuity. A legion split between a resentful figurehead and the lieutenant who destroyed his agency, both trapped in a dynamic their patron god has no interest in resolving because the dysfunction itself feeds him. This is chaos patronage over deep time, documented in excruciating detail. Against that wreckage, the Alpha Legion's cohesion is a glaring anomaly. Decentralized cell structure maintained across 10,000 years in real space. Each cell operating under an officer known as a hero master. Cells coordinating as elements of a larger network. Mission-oriented, redundant, engineered for long-term survival under hostile conditions. No demon Primarch anchoring the hierarchy. No patron god subsidizing survival. No Eye of Terror distorting time to ease the burden. If chaos had its hooks in them, 10 millennia of exposure should have produced the same symptoms visible in every other case study. Broken cells, rogue operatives, accumulated mutations warping priorities, organizational discipline eroding under the warp's corrosive pressure. The Alpha Legion shows none of it. Not one symptom in 10,000 years. A second Traitor Legion sharpens the picture further, because the Night Lords are the only other Traitor Legion that openly rejected the Chaos Gods. Conrad Kurz, their Primarch, was a nihilist and prophet of terror who recognized the Imperium as a lie long before Horus raised his banner. His sons inherited that philosophy whole. Their battle cry captures a theological position of total rejection. Death to the false emperor. Death to the dark gods. Both legions, Night Lords and Alpha Legion, refused to bend the knee to any power, temporal or demonic. Rejection without purpose proved catastrophic for Kurz's sons. After the Primarch's death and the heresy's conclusion, the Night Lords fragmented into disparate warbands driven by necessity and slow degeneration. Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Night Lords trilogy, Soul Hunter, Blood Reaver, Voidstalker, documents this collapse with unflinching clarity. Warbands prey on isolated worlds and shipping lanes. They bicker over resources and personal vendettas, while their shared identity dissolves into a loose confederation of predators who happen to carry the same gene seed. Strategic coordination is gone. Unified vision is gone. Anything beyond surviving to commit the next atrocity has evaporated entirely. Rejecting the gods kept them free of demonic patronage, but freedom alone provided no defense against the entropy of 10,000 years without direction. Dembski-Bowden's trilogy embodies this collapse in microcosm. Warbands bickering over resources and personal vendettas, their shared identity dissolved, any objective beyond the next atrocity extinct. Kurz's nihilism, inherited by his sons, gave them the clarity to reject false gods, but robbed them of any reason to build something in that absence. 2 legions rejected the dark gods outright. Only one retained its organizational spine across 10,000 years. The Night Lords had conviction without direction, a philosophical rejection of all authority that left nothing to replace the structure it tore down. The Alpha Legion had both rejection and purpose, a mission. Whatever that mission is, its mere existence held the Legion together across timescales that dissolved every comparable force in the setting. And here the case shifts from plausible theory to something harder to dismiss. Heresy-era Alpha Legionnaires, the original operatives, Marines who were present during the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago, are confirmed still active in the current 40K timeline. Not successors inheriting a tradition, not new recruits carrying forward institutional memory, the originals. Space Marines can theoretically persist near indefinitely, absent violent death. But surviving 10 millennia while operating in hostile real space without a patron god's protection is exceptional even by Astartes standards. The same warriors who may have received the original mission from Alpharius and Omegon themselves are still out there, still operating, still coordinating through the cell network. If the mission died with a heresy, these veterans would have no reason to maintain discipline across such staggering spans of time. No reason to resist the very corruption that would make their existence easier. Their continued activity doesn't just suggest the original operation is running, it suggests someone is still directing it. The fate of the twin Primarchs is shrouded in the Legion's characteristic misdirection. The lore itself states that it's believed the Alpha Legion Primarch isn't only alive, but very much active behind the scenes, though Omegon's status has never been definitively confirmed. For a Primarch who constructed his entire identity around misdirection and operational security, the absence of confirmation functions as its own kind of evidence. And the structural evidence demands an explanation, because something is holding this network together across distances and timescales that would dissolve any organization without central direction. Shroud of Night and Mike Brooks's Harrowmaster document Alpha Legion operations in the 41st millennium. Both novels reinforce every behavioral marker separating these operatives from genuine chaos servants. The pragmatism persists. Operational flexibility persists. A willingness to employ non-Astartes specialists and cooperate with assets regardless of origin, behaviors that chaos corruption progressively destroys in every documented case, persists into the current era. Chaos makes legions narrower with each passing century, more fanatical, more rigid. The Alpha Legion's continued adaptiveness after 10,000 years of supposed corruption is like finding a building standing pristine in a city where every identical structure collapsed from the same earthquake. Harrowmaster deserves honest treatment. Some readers have described it as author self-insertion, and that criticism has substance, a sense that the protagonist and narrative framing reflect authorial preference more heavily than the established character of the Legion. What the novel does provide is a detailed portrait of modern Alpha Legion cell operations and the layered deception defining their command architecture, material consistent with the behavioral profile the defense has built across every other primary source. The strongest argument against the Alpha Legion's innocence runs like this. Followers of Chaos Undivided, those who serve chaos as a whole rather than any single god, characteristically believe themselves to be above it. They think they're using chaos as a tool. They congratulate themselves on their independence, their strategic clarity, their refusal to submit to any single patron. According to the deepest lore on the warp's nature, that self-congratulation is itself the trap. The illusion of free will is Chaos Undivided's signature corruption. Abaddon the Despoiler embodies this dynamic, a warlord who claims mastery over chaos while wearing the favor of all four gods, understood by the lore's more cynical narrators to be the most effective instrument of the dark gods, precisely because his self-deception runs deepest. Under this framework, the Alpha Legion's apparent freedom isn't evidence of non-corruption. It's the most advanced symptom. That argument is philosophically coherent and deserves respect, but it fails on the specific evidence. Every documented case of Chaos Undivided self-deception produces observable behavioral markers over deep time. Mutations accumulate, warp dependency deepens, internal fragmentation accelerates, strategic capacity degrades. Abaddon's Black Legion fractures into competing factions between each crusade. The word-bearers splintered into rival Dark Apostle fiefdoms. The pattern is universal and merciless. The Alpha Legion displays none of these symptoms across a sample size of 10,000 years. If they're enslaved by Chaos Undivided, they'd be the only slaves in galactic history who bear no marks of the chain. Laid end to end, the evidence forms a picture that the Imperium's filing system was never designed to accommodate. Lowest chaos taint of any Traitor Legion. 10,000 years of organizational cohesion, while every parallel case study shattered under its patron god's weight. No demon Primarch demanding worship. No mutations reshaping biology. Heresy-era operatives confirmed still active and still coordinating. A founding moment in which their Primarchs declared eternal loyalty to the Emperor before walking a path that looked like treachery. Willingness to work with Xeno's intelligences and non-Astartes specialists. Behavior that chaos corruption makes psychologically impossible in every other documented case. A cell-based operational architecture indistinguishable from deep cover intelligence networks running across centuries. And a grand plan that nobody, not the Inquisition, not the Chaos Gods, not the lore community, has been able to identify. The Imperium classified the Alpha Legion as traitors because they sided with Horus during the heresy. That classification was administrative, bureaucratic, the product of a theocratic totalitarian state that recognizes two categories and permits no appeals. Gray areas shatter the system everywhere it's tested. The classification doesn't account for intent, deep cover operations, or the possibility that strategic deception might span millennia. It doesn't describe metaphysical reality. It describes administrative convenience for a regime incapable of nuance. After 10,000 years of accumulated evidence, the question isn't whether the Alpha Legion fell to chaos. Every metric says they didn't. Every comparison to legions that actually fell confirms the absence of every expected symptom. The real question is whether the Imperium's own classification system, rigid, paranoid, incapable of imagining loyalty wearing the mask of betrayal, has spent 10 millennia lying about its most dangerous secret. In a galaxy defined by propaganda, corruption, and institutional blindness, the Alpha Legion made an empire believe they had turned. An empire built that belief into its most foundational records. And for 100 centuries, nobody with the authority to reopen the file has dared to ask whether the Hydra was the enemy, or the only contingency plan the Emperor left behind. Hydra Dominatus. Subscribe for more stories like this.